First of all, hello everybody. And second, before I go to this special law, I wanted to say a word about the circumstances in which it was announced. On Saturday, 21st May, Polish President Andrzej Duda paid an unexpected visit to Kiev and spoke to the members of Ukrainian parliament or the Verkhovna Rada, which is quite important because the Polish president was actually the first head of a Western state that was officially invited to Ukraine and to speak before the parliament since since the outbreak of the war, since the Russian invasion. And I think the moment in which he comes is quite important because the war is now raging for 3 months, and sadly, it is no longer, I would say that the interest in international situation around Ukraine is getting a little bit less intensive than it was at the beginning of the war. So, for Ukrainians, inviting a Polish president is a way of making international public opinion interested in Ukraine once again and to show that Ukraine is still having powerful friends in the West, not only the United States, but also an important country in the center of Europe. This is even more important given the fact that in recent days we heard a lot about German and Italian companies being allowed by their governments to somehow bypass sanctions on importing gas, Russian gas to Europe. They were allowed to open ruble accounts in Gazprom Bank. So this may suggest that the European support for Ukraine is not as strong as it was at the beginning of the war, and perhaps there will be soon business as usual with Russia, despite everything that happened over past weeks. And in this context, the Polish president comes to Ukraine, declares that Ukraine will always decide about herself without any intermediaries, that this is Ukrainian people that will determine its fate, and that Poland will be always the advocate of Ukraine, not only helping the refugees like it did so far, but also advocating fast accession of Ukraine to European Union and other European structures. In response, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, declared two things. First, that Polish Ukrainian relations are now entering a whole new phase. All the historical conflicts and disagreements are now being forgotten. And from now on, Poland and Ukraine will be partners, friends, brothers, whatever you want. And as an act of gratitude for welcoming Ukrainian refugees in Poland, Ukraine will also introduce a special status for Polish citizens in Ukraine. This is basically the special law that you are asking about. What does exactly the special law means? Well, the thing is that we don't really know that. There was some info over different media outlets that Poles will be treated now like citizens of Ukraine, that they will be allowed to take high posts in administration, there will be even judges in Ukrainian courts, nothing of that. This, as the Ukrainian president's office official position is that we don't know yet what exactly will be in this law. And if we can somehow guess that, we can compare it to the special law on Ukrainian refugees that was voted in Polish parliament back in the end of the on back in the end of February. Basically, this Polish law allows Ukrainians to start working in Poland immediately, just after getting an individual registration number. The law also enables Ukrainians to get medical help on the same level as Polish citizens, to be enabled to get social security on the same level as Poles, and basically they can. So this makes an important difference for Ukrainian citizens coming to Poland because before the war, the Ukrainian citizens who tried to settle down here, who wanted to work in Poland, needed to wait for long, for months and sometimes even for years to get the necessary work permits. And as you can imagine, this would be a great problem for Ukrainian refugees coming to Poland now and needing to find a source of income immediately. So, if the special law for Poles is going to be based on the rule of reciprocity, as Zelensky suggested in his speech in Ukraine, in the Verkhovna Rada, It probably means that Poles will be also allowed to run a business in Ukraine on a simplified manner. They will also get easier the work permits in Ukraine. They will be able to get medical aid, social security, well, basically the things that were now allowed to Ukrainians coming to Poland. Does it mean that Zelensky is selling his country to Poland like some Russian media suggested? Well, definitely not. Indeed, also given the whole context, while the simplified mode of getting work permits in Poland is a huge change for Ukrainians, there are not as many Poles willing to go working in Ukraine or running a business in Ukraine. So definitely, even if this special status is a big gesture from the side of Kiev, from the side of Ukrainian government, it is not that important for Poles as it is for Ukrainian refugees, for whom the open border with Poland and the possibility to settle down in Poland immediately was a life-saving measure. It means, first of all, that Ukraine wants to keep these excellent relations it has now in Poland. It desperately needs that Polish aid is kept flowing to Ukraine. Let me just remind you that Poland is among the biggest Ukraine supporters in all possible terms. We are not only talking about refugees. In terms of military supplies, Poland's help between the beginning of Russian invasion and 10th May was worth more than 1.5 billion euros. This makes Poland a gives Poland a second position just behind the US in terms of military aid. If we look at the statistics of overall aid, so also humanitarian aid, medical, everything, then Poland ranks fourth behind the US, United Kingdom, and the European Union as a whole. Also, let me add that Poland, due to its geographical location, is absolutely critical partner of Ukraine. It is through Poland that Ukrainian refugees may reach countries of Western Europe like Germany. Keeping good relations with Poland would be critical for Ukraine also in the after war period. No matter how the war ends, Ukraine will need huge cash for reconstruction, for rebuilding the cities that were ruined, for rebuilding industry that was destroyed. And so far, Poland proved to be this neighbor of Ukraine that was able to give the biggest assistance and seemed to be most interested in offering cheap credit and so on to Ukraine. So, if now Ukrainian government is well aware of the fact that there will be no fast track accession to European Union, as we can see, the war in the east is not making the dynamic brave throws of neither of the side. Neither the Russian offensive turned out to be decisive like the Russian hopes, neither nor the Ukrainian counteroffensive allowed them to win back a huge swaths of territory. So we may expect further weeks of fierce fighting, which only discourages Western partners of Ukraine of admitting this country into European Union in a fast manner, even those countries who seemed favorable to this idea. In this context, it is absolutely essential for Ukraine to gain as much as possible in contacts with Poland to gain a substitute of European integration with this country that is right now the most willing to explore these integration possibilities.